Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. How worried should we be about this new strain of coronavirus? We're being asked to follow new rules to stop the spread of Omicron. Pupils in secondary schools will have to wear masks in communal areas. And from tomorrow, face coverings will be required in shops and also on public transport, along with tougher rules on international travel. We'll be gathering views from the government, scientists, a travel expert, and also a former Prime Minister. Also this morning, the long-awaited sex trafficking trial of the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein's ex-girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, is set to begin in New York City. And...
Hey guys, good to hear you. We have done it! Yeah!
And we'll hear from the Amazon adventurer who walked more than 250 miles through one of the last unexplored wildernesses on Earth. It's Monday, the 29th of November. Boosting the boosters, the government's vaccine advisors are expected to issue new guidance on rapid expansion of the programme to tackle the Omicron variant today.
I'm at London Waterloo Station speaking to travellers about the new rules.
A 14-year-old boy will appear in court charged with the murder of 12-year-old Ava White in Liverpool. France's message to the government: make the UK less attractive to migrants to stop people crossing the channel in small boats. Prince Charles flies into Barbados amid a row over comments in a new book and the end of formal ties between the island nation and the monarchy. Hailed as a genius of the fashion industry, the artistic director of Louis Vuitton, Virgil Abloh, has died at the age of 41.
Thing is, we've taken swift precautionary steps. We don't fully understand this new variant at all yet. It's got 50 mutations, roughly, of which 32 are in the spike protein, the bit that connects the key to us in terms of transmissibility, in terms of how dangerous it is. Therefore, let's let the scientists do their work, but we've taken some proportionate, measured steps to help slow down the spread and the seeding of that variant while they do their work. Hopefully, it won't be a huge concern, but we don't know. We've got to be precautionary in this.
South African Medical Association, the chairman of that, saying the symptoms are very, very mild.
Well, I did see that report, and I think that that doctor was talking about symptoms in predominantly younger people that they'd experienced it in. We don't know how it'll react in terms of older people or with the vaccine. So hopefully that is what we will see, not just in South Africa, but around the world. But we've just taken those precautionary steps while we seek to understand how it works.
Is it about now when we think, you know what, we should have given them more of the vaccines for COVAX? We've only given 11% of what we promised.
Well, if you look at South Africa, I think the president of South Africa or government officials have said there is no shortage of vaccines in South Africa, which is where we've seen this new variant.
But
we've pledged 100 million doses by next June. We've delivered, I think you're absolutely right, about 11% of that so far. We're on target to deliver just over a third of that. A reasonable and swift rollout. And we're still, I think, the second biggest donor supplier of vaccines through the COVAX programme after the United States, I think. So can we do more and do we need to ramp it up? Yes. But are we on target to deliver on that pledge? Yes, we are.
OK, so let's talk about what's going on at home then. Give us an update this morning. How many cases have we got?
So there are you'll have seen in the news overnight 3 confirmed cases. I'll be honest with you and your viewers, I would expect that to rise. We don't know by what speed or by what numbers, so therefore what we're doing is trying to slow it down, but we're clear we can't stop it, and we're trying to give ourselves the time to understand how it works and how it interacts with the vaccine. But
the flights were coming in from South Africa. People were allowed to get off the plane, mingle with hundreds of other passengers coming from. They were allowed off.
Well, I have to say, I think we've moved, possibly globally, among, if not the fastest countries in the world. I think South Africa identified the genomic sequencing on Tuesday. On Thursday, even before this was designated as a variant of concern, which happened on Friday, I think, from WHO. On Thursday, we'd already set out, my boss, Sajid Javid, had set out very swift steps to tackle this, both in terms of borders, but also in terms of the plans around testing and
PCR. My point is,
so I think we
moved, get off the plane.
I think we moved very swiftly. When people were returning or were in flight, They were met by health officials. We would expect them to travel to take that PCR test. And, of course, now we've got the 10 countries, I think it is, on the red list. We will be expecting people, before they travel, to have booked a quarantine hotel. So I think we moved very swiftly, proportionately but swiftly, and tackled what there always is, which is the moment you make an announcement like this, there are calls from people for you to delay it, to give people more time. There are others saying do it immediately. I think we've struck the right balance here in providing that response, but allowing people to get home.
What about people who are in South Africa and other countries there, ready to come back, and now they have to pay £2,250 to stay in a hotel? Could be a family of 4. That's £10,000 that they don't have. What happens then?
Well, I think I do appreciate that's extremely difficult for people who will have gone on holiday, gone to visit family, or gone for family events. And suddenly find that this has changed. Sadly, we've seen over the past year and a half, year and 3/4, this is the nature of this virus. We can never, with total predictability, guarantee when someone travels abroad that there won't be something of this sort. Now, I think the last new variant we saw was...
Africa only just came off the red list, didn't it? And yet some families now could be £10,000 in debt through no fault of their own.
Absolutely. I'm afraid that's sadly, and I'm very sympathetic to that, but that's sadly the nature of this virus and what it does. You're right, it did come off the list pre the identification of this new variant. We've always been clear that was a risk, the new variant. All credit to South Africa for its amazing genomic sequencing and testing programme that identified this new variant very swiftly. And they told us, they told the world, they were very open about that. And they've been exemplary in how they've done that. But sadly, until we understand it, we've got to take those precautionary measures.
Penalised for being so open?
Well, I don't think they're being penalised for being open. We've seen with other countries, when a variant's identified, we've got to take, as have other countries, the necessary steps to help stop that seeding and spreading. Other countries, I think, have been even tougher on some of their border restrictions. I think, I may be wrong, that Israel's closed its borders overnight, and other countries are putting in different levels. So each country is reacting in its own way. We believe that we've reacted in a proportionate and measured way to help address the challenge of this variant while we seek to understand it.
So what else are we doing here? The booster programme, what's going on?
So the booster programme, the Secretary of State, Sajid Javid, as you will know, has asked the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunisations, for advice urgently on, bringing down the gap, potentially, between second and booster jabs, but also in terms of whether the booster programme should be extended downwards in terms of age range. We're awaiting that advice. I hope it will come, hopefully, later today. I don't want to prejudge it. I don't know what.
So our understanding is that it's anybody over 18 gets a booster.
But I think that's what they are looking at. I don't know what they're going to recommend. I haven't seen the advice. You and your team may have done, but I haven't yet, because I don't think it's been formally delivered. But we'd expect that within the coming hours.
OK, so sometime today we'll hear further on what's happening. And the gap between the second booster and the second vaccine and the booster, that could come down to 5 months. Potentially, but we'll wait for their advice. That's what they're there for, and we will look very carefully at the advice they give us, hopefully in the next few hours. OK. As far as the symptoms are concerned, we don't. How do we actually know whether people have got the Omicron variant or it's the Delta variant, or whether, because the symptoms are very similar? They are, and that's why we're recommending, and we recommend people with symptoms, you and I and others will probably be taking lateral flow tests, if not daily, every couple of days or similar, or regularly. What we're saying to people with symptoms is that they should take a PCR test, because the PCR test gives the facility to do the genomic sequencing that helps us identify which are Omicron, which are Delta. The lateral flow test won't do that, but the PCRs will, and therefore when people have symptoms, or if they test positive on a lateral flow, again, that's why we're advising a PCR test to allow for that genomic sequencing. So why did we do away with the PCR test for people coming back from holiday? We reacted in what we thought was a proportionate way to the level both of threat and knowledge we had of existing threats. Time and again, this virus has shown us that we can't be complacent, which is exactly what you were saying. But we struck an appropriate balance there. We still had the surveillance programme, which allows us to genomically sequence through PCRs to understand whether new variants are coming through. And we have to strike a balance. It goes back to your point just now, Kay, again, about the price of things, the ability for people to go abroad on holiday. We think we've struck the right balance. But when a new variant comes along, we got that through genomic sequencing.
We're now using PCR tests just to identify where that is in the community, if it gets into the community more broadly, but particularly for travellers coming into this country.
So we were risking the health of the nation because of cheap lateral flow tests?
No, I don't think we were risking it, because I think on the basis of
why have we changed them back to PCRs?
On the basis of what we were seeing with existing variants, knowledge of them, as scientists understood those existing variants, lateral flow tests and similar were appropriate. What we're seeing now is a new variant. While we seek to understand that over the next 2-3 weeks, which is hopefully all it will take for scientists to be able to actually understand transmissibility, how dangerous it is, impact on vaccines, it's right that we use the PCRs to better understand that genomic sequence and where it may have spread in the community. As I say, I would expect, I'm afraid, more cases in this country, but we need to work out where they are.
How long do you expect the red list to be in place for?
Well, we'll follow the evidence, but in 3 weeks' time, the Prime Minister and Secretary of State...
Christmas Eve.
So just shy of, I think, but we'll review the...
Mask wearing in a second, but...
Of course. That gives enough time for us to see how this disease behaves. We know that you and I have talked about it many times, the lag time between infection, between becoming ill, between serious illness, and equally it gives the scientists time to do that work on this. So it gives enough time to understand the impact of it.
But people who've booked their Christmas holidays, what are you saying to them? Cancel them?
No, what we're saying is follow they're all red list countries. You know, they're all people shouldn't be travelling to them, so that is difficult. But what we've said is if people are coming back from South Africa, we've put in place the quarantine hotels. That's, again, from what you were just saying, quite rightly you highlight, that's a big cost, and I think people will think about that very carefully. Other countries, we've said PCR testing, etc. We're not saying cancel your holidays to France or other countries, but we have put in place that proportionate testing and border control
But people who are going to a red list country, it's on the red list at the moment. They really shouldn't be.
Well, I'll be honest, and I've said it before, is we cannot say what will happen there over the coming weeks, and therefore, going to your earlier point, in travelling at the moment with this virus, particularly with a new variant around, there is an element of risk there for people. So
might you review that before 3 weeks?
we need to have the 3 weeks in order to understand how this new variant works. I hope that the scientists and those researching it will get more information more quickly. And actually, one of the things we did last week was we were open as quickly as we could be with the British people about what we were finding, even without fully knowing how this new variant worked. We wanted to level the British people, which is what my boss, the Secretary of State, did last week. Mask
wearing, you mentioned, you touched on that. It's going to be tricky for your boss, isn't it, your big boss? He's never wearing a mask.
I don't think so. I think he will comply with the rules, just as we all do. When I was sitting out, when not being interviewed, when I was sitting out in your lobby earlier, I was wearing my mask, took it off to do interviews, and then we'll put it on again when I leave.
I mean, can you not catch COVID in a pub?
Well, equally in pubs, restaurants, hospitality venues, partly we've always seen this throughout the pandemic. People are eating, drinking, etc. Clearly impractical to wear a mask in those circumstances. Say a restaurant, a lot of time is spent sitting down with your group, whoever you've come with, family, friends,
etc. If you're at the bar in a pub, should you put your mask on?
And ordering and that. Again, on that, we're not making it a legal requirement, but people will make their own judgments.
But why not? Why
because we believe that shops and public transport, often very confined spaces, take a bus or a tube...
Have you been into a London pub?
Or whatever.
It's mad.
Well, hang on, I'll come on to that. We think that's a proportionate response. It's a measured response while we understand how this variant works. We don't believe we need to or should do that in hospitality or restaurant venues at this point. And hopefully we won't need to make any further changes. Hopefully in 3 weeks we'll be able to scale back what we've done. But we're being honest, we don't know how this virus with this new variant behaves yet. So we've got to be measured in what we do.
My point is, crowded pub, standing at the bar, surely you should have to wear your mask then.
No, I think, well, if you're standing at the bar, chances are you're ordering a drink and then drinking a drink. And therefore, you won't be wearing a mask while you're drinking your drink. So
no,
I think
you go and get your drink and then you go back to your table.
Mm-hmm. But you're only going to be doing that for a brief period. Go to the bar, order your drink and come back. If you're in a tube, on a bus, you're likely to be on there 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour. And we go back, I think you've been interviewing me now for a year and a half, almost 2 years. And when we were first talking about this, we talked about both distance but also the length of time you're in close proximity to an individual. Therefore, we think this is proportionate and it's the right precautionary balance to strike.
OK, we are out of time, but, I mean, I have to have some sympathy for you. When are we going to see the back of this virus?
Well, I think the whole country wants to see the back of this virus. As Sajid Javid said, the pandemic isn't over yet, and we've seen that with this new variant. But we are in a hugely different place to where we were, as Chris Whitty said, with any of the previous new variants. That vaccination programme has made a huge difference in protecting our citizens, protecting our society and enabling us to open up. And the measures we're putting in place now, as I say, are proportionate, they're measured, while we understand how this works. So I think we've made huge strides forward, and I'm looking forward to a Christmas spent with family and friends.
OK, and finally, could we possibly find ourselves in a position where you tighten the rules up even further within the next 3 weeks?
It's not something I'm anticipating.
Oh, I like to hear that. Good to talk to you. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks,
really appreciate it. Thank you. Remember where you heard it first. Let's have a look what the papers are saying this morning. Thank you, Minister. It's not too much to mask, says the Metro, as masks are set to become mandatory again in shops and public transport in England from tomorrow. And the Eye leads with news that face masks will also be required again in communal areas of schools in England from today. But new requirements for everyone, including children, to isolate if they come into contact with an Omicron case will cause chaos in schools. That's according to The Telegraph. The Daily Mail, with the paper saying all over 18s will be offered a booster. The Mirror calls it. Meantime, the government is to make masks mandatory, as we were saying, on public transport due to the emergence of the Omicron variant, with the rules coming into place from tomorrow. Our reporter Aisha Saeed is at London's Waterloo station for us this morning. Good morning, good morning. So you don't have to wear a mask at the pub, but you will have to wear one where you are. Good morning, Aisha. How's that being received this morning?
Morning, Kay. Well, it's been a big mixed bag of opinions here. That's right. From tomorrow, people will have to wear face coverings when travelling on public transport in England. I have to say, looking around Waterloo station today, it's very much a 50-50 split, if not more people not wearing masks than those who are, which is likely to look very different from tomorrow. We've spoken to a few people travelling this morning, and it has been mixed opinions. Some people really welcoming the move. They feel the government's making the right decision. One commuter told me that she's glad it's being made mandatory again because she has felt unsafe travelling to work over the last few months. But other people, quite frankly, fed up. They don't want to see masks coming back. But one thing that virtually everyone I've spoken to has agreed upon is a question over what compliance will look like. When the mandate was dropped back in July, Network Rail said that only 20% of people travelling on trains were wearing face coverings. And it's something that several unions for travel workers have expressed concerns over, how many people will wear masks when it is reintroduced. Now, all of this comes in a bid to target that Omicron variant. It's a variant, the worst one yet, according to experts. 3 cases identified in the UK so far: Brentwood, Nottingham, and another from a person travelling through the Westminster area. The Prime Minister said this is one of several measures which the Prime Minister has said is only going to be temporary and proportionate, and that measures will be reviewed in 3 weeks' time. So it will be a case of waiting to see what happens next as scientists work out more about the Omicron variant. OK,
thank you, Aisha. Thank you. Still to come on the programme for you this morning as the long-awaited sex trafficking trial for Ghislaine Maxwell begins in New York at 7:30. Going to be speaking to a lawyer who's acted on behalf of some of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. 7:45, speaking to the chair of the South African Medical Association with the doctor who first spotted the new Omicron variant. And the new COVID variant raised concerns about the lack of vaccines in poor countries. Going to be speaking to the former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown. 50 pub goers have spent their third night snowed in at the Tan Hill Inn in the Yorkshire Dales. We'll be hearing from the manager at 9:20. The trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, former socialite and long-time friend of Jeffrey Epstein, is due to begin in New York later on today. Prosecutors will argue that she recruited and groomed girls for the disgraced financier to abuse, charges that she denies. On the eve of the trial, her brother has told Sky News he is relieved it's about to get underway. From New York, Joe Pike reports.
She mixed with the rich and famous, was a friend of princes and presidents.
I've met her numerous times over the years. I wish her well.
But it's Ghislaine Maxwell's links to paedophile Jeffrey Epstein that mean she's now due in court, on trial after decades of explosive abuse allegations and facing the fight of her life.
Given where we are in this moment of time with the Me Too movement, this is the first time you've got a woman so publicly on trial for these kind of crimes.
Vicky Ward has been investigating Jeffrey Epstein for almost 20 years.
One of the reasons this trial has attracted so much attention because the idea that a privileged is alleged to have done this to helpless underage females. There's something so unspeakably awful about that.
Ghislaine Maxwell denies grooming underage girls so Jeffrey Epstein could sexually abuse them. The crimes are alleged to have taken place at Epstein's various mansions, including this one in Manhattan.
Ghislaine Maxwell is facing 6 counts of sex trafficking between 1994 and 2004 against 4 alleged victims. Prosecutors say the youngest was 14 years old.
Jeffrey Epstein died in prison in 2019 while awaiting trial in an apparent suicide. Within months, Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested on this remote estate and imprisoned. She was refused bail 6 times and at one point appeared to have a black eye. Her family claim she's being mistreated.
Both Ghislaine and the family are relieved that we are finally getting to the moment of truth. And this trial is about to begin. It's been over 500 days now that she has been in isolation in prison.
But the decision over whether she takes the stand has yet to be made.
A defendant testifying is always risky because a defendant will open him or herself up to cross-examination, to examination as to prior bad acts, to prior criminal conduct, to prior possibly even immoral conduct.
It has yet to be revealed exactly what evidence prosecutors will present here at court and who is cooperating with them. But pre-trial hearings suggest they will call an expert witness on grooming and show the jury a contacts book.
This trial may not be the last in the Epstein saga, but whatever the verdict, many hope it will provide some answers about the 2 mysterious figures at its heart. Joe Pike, Sky News, New York.
Prince of Wales is in Barbados for a ceremony to mark the Caribbean island ending its formal ties with the monarchy and becoming a republic. The visit takes place amid a row over accusations in a new book that he questioned the future skin tone of Harry and Meghan's children at the time of their engagement. A palace source said this is fiction and not worth further comment. The heir to the throne is in Barbados at the invitation of the country's Prime Minister and is expected to reaffirm the UK's close and continuing relationship with the island nation. French Interior Minister has said the UK needs to make itself less attractive to migrants who want to try to cross the Channel. Gérald Darmanin was speaking after a meeting of his European counterparts, from which the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, was invited but then excluded from Calais. Ali Fortescue reports.
After tragedy, there's often politics. And as ministers in charge of migration from France, Belgium, Germany and the Netherlands gathered in Calais, notably absent the British Home Secretary.
Si quelque chose vraiment va changer aujourd'hui, n'est-ce que c'est pas important que les Anglais soient là aujourd'hui?
Je veux dire que j'ai des échanges extrêmement intenses avec mon homologue britannique, mais vous avez entendu la déclaration du président de la République et à la suite des échanges publics que le gouvernement britannique a voulu faire, on a considéré que ce n'était pas une façon sérieuse de travailler. Cette réunion n'était pas anti-anglaise, elle était pro-européenne. Et nous devons travailler avec nos amis britanniques et leur dire un certain nombre de choses.
Priti Patel did speak to the Dutch migration minister. She said they talked about the importance of agreements to return migrants. But she was disinvited from the summit after Boris Johnson was accused of not being serious enough. In a statement, the Home Secretary said that the UK will continue to push for greater cooperation with EU partners, because failure to do so, she said, could result in even worse scenes in freezing water during the coming months.
Behind the scenes, things were always kind of working well, and there was still always a lot of cooperation going on. What is different now is that the relationship behind the scenes too has genuinely deteriorated.
Both sides are playing to a domestic audience too, with the French president fighting a presidential election from the right, and in Britain, Boris Johnson, who pledged to take back control of our borders. There had been hope that a human tragedy would refocus minds beyond politics, but it may just have hardened the resolve on both sides.
On the British side of the Channel, many came to remember. Whatever the politics, this is about 27 people who lost their lives. The boat they travelled in, the remains of which were found later, is thought to have come from Germany. And we know smuggler supply chains operate well beyond Calais, which is why this summit was all about a broader European approach.
We agreed to have an even closer cooperation between the member states and the Commission via our agencies, and to be able to deploy, for example, airplane, also standing course if necessary, to work closer also on returns and on police cooperation.
It was, in many ways, an unprecedented meeting. And where there was no big announcement, there was solidarity on this side of the Channel. Ali Fortescue, Sky News in Calais.
Teenage boy is to appear in court in Liverpool. The 14-year-old, who can't be named for legal reasons, was also charged with possession of a blade, while 3 other boys between the ages of 13 and 15 who were arrested have been released on bail. Ava was killed in the city centre on Thursday after meeting friends to watch the Christmas lights being switched on. The artistic director of Louis Vuitton, Virgil Abloh, has died of cancer at the age of 41. The designer made history in 2018 as the first African-American to lead Louis Vuitton, the world's biggest luxury brand. Abloh also worked as a DJ and visual artist, and the rapper and producer Pharrell Williams is among the names paying tribute. He said, "My heart is broken. Virgil, you were a kind, generous, thoughtful, creative genius. Your work as a human and your work as a spiritual being will live forever, sending love and light to your wife, children, family and day ones. You're with the master now, shine." Quick look at the weather.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It's absolutely freezing this morning, -2 as I got into the car. So if you are heading out, you can see clear skies, some rain on its way from the west, but make sure that you wrap up warm.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And we'll be chatting to some people in Yorkshire who've now had their 3rd night in a pub where they are completely snowed in. It was karaoke night last night, apparently. I wonder what they were singing. Winter Wonderland, doubt it. We'll be talking to them. But did you catch some of the snow this weekend where you were? Many of us have been out enjoying the colder weather. Well, perhaps. Maybe not enjoying it quite as much as this pair of polar bears captured in central Canada. 60% of the world's polar bear population can be found in Canada. And these two were spotted in Churchill, Manitoba, which has been nicknamed the polar bear capital of the world. Having an absolute... Just hearing from the World Health Organization, actually, they have just issued a statement via the Reuters news agency saying, depending on the characteristics of the Omicron variant, there could be future surges of COVID-19 which could have severe consequences. That is what the World Health Organization is saying within the last few moments, and suggesting that people take that into consideration when they are planning to travel over the next few days and weeks. Meantime, with plans to restrict the spread of the variant in the UK set to go before Parliament, the government has admitted that it expects the number of cases to rise here as well. The Health Minister, Ed Argo, told me a short while ago that measures set to be introduced will not stop the spread of the new strain.
You'll have seen in the news overnight 3 confirmed cases. I'll be honest with you and your viewers, I would expect that to rise. We don't know by what speed or by what numbers, so therefore what we're doing is trying to slow it down, but we're clear we can't stop it, and we're trying to give ourselves the time to understand how it works and how it interacts with the vaccine. But that's why we're putting in place these sensible precautionary measures to help slow it down.
Well, the Minister also told me that the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation should be making a decision at some point today on extending the booster programme to all ages and shortening the gap between 2nd and 3rd vaccinations.
The Secretary of State, Sajid Javid, as you will know, has asked the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunisations for advice urgently on the bringing down the gap potentially between second and booster jabs, but also in terms of whether the booster programme should be extended downwards in terms of age range. We're awaiting that advice. I hope it will come, hopefully, later today. I don't want to prejudge it. I don't know what.
So our understanding is that it's anybody over 18 gets a booster.
But I think that's what they are looking at. I don't know what they're going to recommend yet. I haven't seen the advice. You and your team may have done, but I haven't yet because I don't think it's been formally delivered. But we'd expect that within the coming hours.
OK, so sometime today we'll hear further on what's happening. And the gap between the second booster and the second vaccine and the booster, that could come down to 5 months.
Potentially, but we'll wait for their advice. That's what they're there for, and we will look very carefully at the advice they give us, hopefully in the next few hours.
Tamara's here. Good morning, good morning. Lots to talk to the Minister about this morning. It's you know, they say that the government says that they've moved quickly to try to sort this problem out, but it's you know, 6 2/3 at this stage, isn't it?
Well, as we discovered with previous variants, Kay, once you see a couple of cases, the likelihood is it's spread much further than we expected. And that's why in the past they have been slower to put countries on the red list, because they say once a variant is present, it's probably present in a lot of different countries. In this case, they've put restrictions on South Africa and several other African countries. But the clear message is that the government expects the number of cases to rise. The uncertainty is how quickly it rises, how transmissible is this variant compared to the Delta variant, and how serious is the disease that it causes, because South Africa has a younger population than ours. So those are the two unknowns, which they hope will become much clearer in the next 2 to 3 weeks. But until we know that, there are more restrictions. First of all, we expect today the government to announce that all over 18s can get a booster once they have had the proper time interval since their second jab. Not sure that will necessarily be reduced to 5 months. We'll see on that. So boosters to be expanded to give everyone a bit more immunity to the virus. We're also going to see measures in schools from today, secondary school pupils having to wear their masks in communal corridors and so on. And from tomorrow, we've got regulations before Parliament today, mask wearing in shops, not in pubs and restaurants, but in shops.
Why not? I wasn't really clear.
I think, although that is the rule in indoor settings in Scotland and Wales, the ministers seem to think it was impractical in venues where people are eating and drinking. I think they spreads, and there are a lot of cases. Anyone who's been in contact with an Omicron case will have to self-isolate no matter what their vaccination status. So that is something to watch, because if the number of cases gets into the hundreds or thousands, we could see problems with that in schools and workplaces, perhaps even a return to the pingdemic of a few months ago. But that is for later. For the moment, these are restrictions which ministers believe will slow the spread while we get to grips with how serious it is.
And this will become law, the mask wearing?
This will become law, yes.
Yeah.
And there'll be fines of £200 at least if you don't comply.
Yeah, he did say that he didn't envisage any tougher restrictions than the ones that are presently in place. That's what was interesting.
That's right. They don't envision anything tougher for the next 3 weeks. Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, says he hopes to lift some of these restrictions in the next 3 weeks, but there is so much uncertainty about this at the moment, about how severe it is, how transmissible it is, and how effective, crucially, the vaccines are against it. Scientists say, of course, it's worth having your booster. That will give you some protection. But if it's less protection than against Delta, that is one of the things that they're looking at.
OK, tomorrow's take at 9 o'clock.
See you then.
Look forward to it. Thank you. Now, it's been a difficult few weeks for the government and the Conservative Party, of course, from allegations of sleaze to controversial changes to the social care cap. And this week, an unresolved approach to migration policy resulting in human tragedy in the English Channel. The first real public test of how people feel about all of it will come next week, when voters of Old Bexley and Sidcup, a long-held safe Conservative seat, elect a new MP. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has been there talking to people and sent this report.
A visionary, not for the last 3 weeks. Doubts in Westminster, tension over big decisions.
Prime Minister, sit down, Prime Minister.
Massive spending on transport for the North.
£96 billion. Nothing like it. Again, nothing like it.
Overshadowed by broken promises.
Were the voters of the North right to take the Prime Minister at his word?
A long-term policy failure they promised to fix, unresolved.
Disaster underscores how dangerous it is to cross the Channel.
Anger that the least well-off got a worse deal on social care.
It's another broken promise.
Major speech.
Hands up anyone who's been to Peppa Pig World. Not enough.
Leading to uncomfortable questioning.
Is everything OK, Prime Minister?
To test that important question, does any of this make a difference in the country, we asked voters in the South London seat of Old Bexley and Sidcup whether there is a by-election next week.
I've always voted Tory. Always voted Tory. And events of the last few days, yes, they've made me wobble a little bit.
And why is that?
I just don't trust Boris. I just don't think the man's got a grip.
What do you think of the last 2 weeks?
Not very good.
Why?
Why? I don't think he's giving people confidence at the moment, because there's a lot with immigration, there's lots of things. He's done very good, but all of a sudden I think he's gone off the boil.
Have you voted for him in the past?
I have.
And what's started to change your mind about what you think of him? Do you think what you've seen even in the last few weeks is going to change the way you vote next week?
Probably.
Migrant boat crisis or the stumbles in the Prime Minister's speech. Unlike some politicians, however, they take a longer view. MPs can wobble. Voters seem to hold their nerve.
Holding their nerve because voters point to and care about the assistance government gave to individuals and small businesses over the last 2 years of the pandemic.
Do you think there's anything he could do that would mean he probably didn't get your vote next time?
Oh, God. Probably not, no.
In Westminster, Northern MPs like Andrew Percy, who voted against his government this week, worry about its direction.
There are too many issues at the moment in which the government is shooting itself in the foot with issues and problems which, as I say, colleagues are warning and warning and warning about, and that are visible from Venus, Mars, maybe even visible from Pluto, and that has got to stop because we owe the people of this country better than that.
Many MPs are concerned Boris Johnson promised big but is struggling to deliver, and this also applies to boats crossing the Channel.
There is a genuine concern that the government has talked tough, quite rightly. The government genuinely wants this trade to end, as we all do, but we haven't been able to achieve that on our own because most of the cards are in the hands of the French. And perhaps it was unwise to overpromise when we couldn't rely on the sort of partnership that we need.
A by-election here next week and another in 2 weeks. That will tell us whether the country shares the concerns of Boris Johnson's MPs. Sam Coates, Sky News.
Of course, Sam and the team will be covering that story for us throughout the time between now and the by-election. Who knows what might happen? We'll cover it for you here on Sky. Something else we've been covering for you over the last couple of months is what's going on with that volcano. There it is on La Palma. Lava spewing from a new opening on the Cumbre Vieja volcano on Sunday as the eruption entered its 10th week. My goodness me. Scientists from the Canary Islands Volcanological Institute, it's hard to say on a Monday morning, said the new vent opened overnight, allowing huge clouds of smoke to blow into the sky. It comes after La Palma's airport recently reopened after cleaning services dispersed much of the ash cloud from the atmosphere. Local authorities say the lava's damaged more than 2,500 buildings and displaced thousands of people from their homes. Looks pretty dramatic still, doesn't it? We did hear from a volcanologist who said that it would continue to be active until after Christmas. Coming up, going to be speaking to the chair of the South African Medical Association, the doctor who first spotted the new Omicron variant.
Did you know that reducing pollution outside of school can help stop toxic air getting trapped in our classrooms?
There'll be a cold, frosty start to the day for many inland areas, although there'll be a few rogue showers over eastern coastal counties. Increasing cloud over Scotland and Ireland will bring patchy rain that will fall as snow on its leading edge. Through the day, rain will spread southwards with blustery showers following. The southern half of the country will stay fine through much of the day, although cloud will increase from the north. Air quality will remain low in these changing conditions, ranging between 1 and 3 on the air pollution scale.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
When pupils go back to school this morning, they'll be required to wear masks in communal areas. The advice from the government follows confirmation of a third case of the Omicron variant in the UK. Scientists are concerned that the new strain of coronavirus could be resistant to vaccines, and the new measures are intended to slow its spread. People are also being asked to wear masks in shops and on public transport, although those rules don't formally come into force until tomorrow. Enda Brady has this report.
The Omicron variant is here, but how do we stop it from spreading? Face coverings will be mandatory for pupils, staff and visitors from this morning in communal areas of secondary schools. Some teachers' unions say that isn't enough.
Vaccination is going to be a really important part of the solution to this, but we haven't yet even offered vaccination to half of those secondary age pupils. So this makes it all the more clear that the government should have invested in ventilation and air filtration. I think they were hoping that the vaccination that we were seeing the end of Delta, we were going to get away with it. And we all wish that that was true.
From tomorrow, face coverings will be compulsory in shops, banks, post offices and hairdressers, as well as on public transport. All travellers arriving into the country from 4 a.m, regardless of vaccination status, will be required to take a PCR test on or before day 2. They'll have to self-isolate until they receive a negative result.
We're showing that we're worried about it by the actions that have been rapidly taken by the UK government, but also by other governments around the world. It has more mutations than anything we've seen before, and some of those mutations are in areas of the virus that will particularly affect the immune response.
Updated advice from the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation on expanding the booster programme is also imminent. Later today, an urgent meeting of G7 health ministers will take place, with just one topic on the agenda: how to tackle a variant that could derail all the progress that has been made so far in this pandemic. Enda Brady, Sky News.
Well, with plans to restrict the spread of the Omicron variant in the UK set to go before Parliament, the government has admitted that it expects the number of cases to rise. The Health Minister, Edward Argo, told me just a short while ago, actually, that measures set to be introduced will not stop the spread of the new strain.
You'll have seen in the news overnight 3 confirmed cases. I'll be honest with you and your viewers, I would expect that to rise. We don't know by what speed or by what numbers, so therefore what we're doing is trying to slow it down, but we're clear we can't stop it, and we're trying to give ourselves the time to understand how it works and how it interacts with the vaccine. But that's why we're putting in place these sensible precautionary measures to help slow it down.
Well, the Minister also told me that the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, JCVI, you'll have heard that acronym, should be making a decision at some point today on extending the booster programme to all ages and then shortening the gap between the second and the third vaccinations.
The Secretary of State, Sajid Javid, as you will know, has asked the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccinations and Immunisations, for advice urgently on bringing down the gap potentially between second and booster jabs, but also in terms of whether the booster programme should be extended downwards in terms of age range. We're awaiting that advice. I hope it will come hopefully later today. I don't want to prejudge it. I don't know what.
So our understanding is that it's anybody over 18 gets a booster.
But I think that's what they are looking at. I don't know what they're going to recommend. I haven't seen the advice. You and your team may have done, but I haven't yet because I don't think it's been formally delivered. But we'd expect that within the coming hours.
OK, so sometime today we'll hear further on what's happening. And the gap between the second booster and the second vaccine and the booster, that could come down to 5 months.
Potentially, but we'll wait for their advice. That's what they're there for, and we will look very carefully at the advice they give us, hopefully in the next few hours.
Tomorrow's here. So Sajid Javid asked the JCVI to look at this urgently. We'll hear later on today what they're planning to do, we believe. What's Labour saying about all this?
So Labour have said on Saturday that they believe that they've been very much in favour of extending boosters and also of having more restrictions. I expect these new measures on masks to sail through Parliament tomorrow. But they've also said that they want the gap between the second jab and the booster to be reduced to 5 months. It's not clear what the official advice is going to be on that today, and it's almost certain the government will follow whatever that advice is. They've also, for months now, been saying that they feel that there should be masks in more indoor settings in England, as there are in Scotland. In Scotland, if you go to a bar or restaurant, you do have to wear your mask. In Wales, you have to wear them in most indoor settings, not hospitality, but certainly in cinemas and theatres and so on. That is not going to be the case in England. So Labour have said that the government should have kept more of those rules on mandatory mask wearing indoors. So I'm sure we'll see a bit of I told you so. And Keir Starmer has also talked about people who can work from home doing so. That is not a route the government want to go down unless it's a last resort, because they know that it has a big economic impact.
Yeah. Interestingly, though, that the government think that you can't catch COVID in the pub.
That's right. Edward Arger, the health minister, said they believe that mandating masks on public transport and in shops is a common sense approach, and it's proportionate, because in venues where people are eating and drinking, taking them off, putting them on again, it's not very practical. But they make it work in Scotland, in other European countries. People are wearing their masks when they go into a restaurant and taking them off when they sit at the table, as was the case in England at an earlier stage of the pandemic. So the government are trying to go for perhaps the lowest hanging fruit in terms of things that people can do, and especially since they want to back this up with fines, it's easier to see someone in a shop not wearing a mask and say you should have a fine than, for example, someone in a pub who may have taken theirs off to have a drink and then needed to put it on again. So I think it's a question of enforcement and what feels most realistic to enforce.
Now, I know you'll do all this more in tomorrow's Take, coming up at the top of the 9 o'clock hour, but could we see any tighter restrictions between now and Christmas?
No one's ruled it out. It would be, in the view of most ministers, wrong to rule out anything at this stage when there's so much unknown about the Omicron variant. We simply don't know whether it's going to be more transmissible than the Delta variant. That's obviously going to be crucial for how fast it spreads, how severe will be the disease that it causes. So far, not very serious, but that's in young people in South Africa. It's not spread yet among older people. And then, of course, whether the vaccines are as effective as they have been against other strains. So all these things, they hope, will be clear in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Sajid Javid told Sky News yesterday that everyone could expect to have a great Christmas. I'm sure that that's probably going to be under review over the next few weeks.
Well, let's see tomorrow. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. What's going to happen as far as schools are concerned? Children over a certain age, year 7, will have to wear masks. Becky is at a school in Birmingham for us. Hello, Becky. Good morning. So what's the plan?
Yeah, so we're hearing that from today, staff and students, year 7 and above, so secondary school students, will have to wear masks in school. This was a policy earlier in the year when that phased return began after lockdown, but they removed that recommendation for masks, and it is just a recommendation. It's not compulsory at the moment, but they have now brought that back in because of concerns about this new variant. Now, I'm at Bristol Hall Academy in Birmingham, and I've got the principal here, Cully Uppel. Now, Cully, do you think that it would be better if masks were in the classrooms as well? Because at the moment this does just apply to the communal areas, doesn't it?
Well, the guidance has just only been released on Saturday. We've communicated with parents this morning to say that the mask should be worn in corridors and communal areas. And of course, we'll continue to follow the guidance to ensure that students are as safe as possible, as well as our staff too. So if that's the classrooms later on, we'll certainly follow that too.
Yeah, because of course COVID doesn't differentiate between corridors and classrooms, does it?
It doesn't, no. And that's why we say we closely follow the guidance to ensure that safety is of absolute paramount importance.
And there have been calls that students should be exempt from having to isolate if they come into contact with someone who has tested positive with this new Omicron variant. Do you agree with that? Would you prefer to see students in school even if they do come into contact with someone who's tested positive for the new variant?
Well, I think that needs to remain with the scientists, really, who give us the best support, those medical experts, because, of course, our most important factor is we keep them safe, we ensure that they continue to learn, and if they do have to isolate, here at Bristol Hall Academy, we'll ensure that learning continues remotely via whatever package it is that's in place.
And obviously students have already missed a lot of school time because of COVID. Do you worry you will have to close early before Christmas?
There aren't any indications of that just yet. However, as we say, and it sounds like a repeated line always, that we continue to follow the guidance, but if that was the case, and if that's something that was a decision that was taken, we'll ensure that the learning continues, because our students must make sure that they get the best provision, of course, all the time.
Thank you, Mr. Uppel. And Kate, we'll be bringing you more from Bristol Hall Academy throughout the morning. We're expecting the students to arrive any minute, and from today they will be having to wear masks in communal areas.
OK, lovely. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Quick look at the weather.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Cloud and rain spreading in from the northwest will introduce a brief spell of milder air, but colder conditions will return later in the week.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.